And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Now TV. This is what I call my morning musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hope you've had a fantastic week so far. Thank you again for joining me. And by the way, let me encourage you, every Tuesday evening, 6 o'clock, that's Central Time, 7 o'clock Eastern Time? I always get that confused. Please join me and Daniel Rogers on fulfilledradio.com. Pardon me. Our program is called Two Guys in a Bible. And we have been involved for a good little while now. We began with William Bell. And we've been discussing the subject of the Messianic temple. Now look, I don't have to tell you how important a topic that is, I am sure. My dispensational friends tell us, well, look, the Messianic temple, the third temple, is going to be rebuilt at any time now. Interestingly enough, as I share on the program, I remember back during the mid to late 60s, in which there was all sorts of fervor and fever and excitement and enthusiasm of the dispensational writers and preachers saying, they're getting ready to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem right now. There are trains full of building material that's getting ready to be shipped over to Israel. You've got to get ready because the end is near. But like I said, that was in the mid to late 60s. And here we are 60 years later, and they're no closer to building the temple in Jerusalem today than then. So this is a fascinating and important subject. So let me encourage you once again, join Daniel Rogers and me every Tuesday evening on www.fulfilledradio.com. It's a radio program, but we're doing it with film as well. All right? So www.fulfilledradio.com. The program is called Two Guys and a Bible. And it's really informal, and I think you'll like the format. I think you will like how in-depth we discuss the issues, how cautious we are, if you wish to use that term, in our exegesis of Scriptures. Look, we're not sensationalistic. We do not believe that the end is just around the corner. We do not believe, as one guy told me over the last couple of days on Facebook, the world has never been as bad as it is right now. Well, anyone who says that, as I pointed out to this gentleman, and I said it very kindly, anyone who thinks that the world is the worst it's ever been in the history of the world simply does not understand world history. They certainly do not understand biblical history. So, like I said, fulfilledradio.com, Two Guys in a Bible, every Tuesday evening, 6 o'clock Central Time. That's 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Okay, well again, thank you so much for joining me. Now, we have been discussing for a good little while whether or not there is a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 27. Our dispensational friends and neighbors tell us there absolutely must be a gap between the 69th and the 70th week. Because you see, the entire dispensational paradigm, I mean, the whole house of dispensationalism is built upon the claim that God looked down through the stream of time. He chose the first century for the time as just the right time to send his son to offer the kingdom, the Davidic kingdom to Israel. Jesus came. He offered the Davidic kingdom to Israel, but Israel rejected that kingdom offer, and as a result of that, God withdrew the kingdom offer. He suspended the prophetic countdown of Daniel chapter 9, postponed the kingdom until such a time that he will come, Jesus will come, remove the church from the earth. And because you see, in the dispensational paradigm, God never, ever, ever predicted the establishment of the church. It was a, quote, unforeseen contingency. It was a plan B. Just recently on Facebook and on YouTube, I've been interacting with dispensationalists who tell me God never predicted the church anywhere in the Old Testament. Well, that's strange. Jesus said, even in the midst of Jewish rejection and rebellion, that the things foretold by the Old Testament prophets were happening in his ministry. Now remember, this is after Jesus perceived the hardness of the heart of the Jews, according to Matthew chapter 12. Jesus didn't say, never did he say, the kingdom was going to be withdrawn if they weren't repentant and accepted his offer. He said, no, no, no. In spite of their rebellion, Luke chapter 10, 9 to 11, nevertheless, in spite of the rebellion, in spite of the unbelief, nevertheless, the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. Ladies and gentlemen, it is absolutely critical that you understand that the Jewish rejection of Jesus did not catch God off guard. God never said, oops, what am I going to do now? Never. And so, over the last several months, I've been sharing with you some propositional charts in which I lay out and I say, and this is all based upon the logical form of argumentation called modus potens, which means if this is true, then this is true. So, if there is a gap, for instance, charts 1 through 3, if there is a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 7, and if Jesus knew about that gap, then he couldn't come saying the kingdom of heaven is drawn near, because there were still 2,000 years of delay to come. If there's not a gap between the 69th and the 70th week, then Jesus was absolutely accurate to say the kingdom of heaven is drawn near, which means if it was not established, the prophecy of Daniel 9 failed. It is absolutely fundamentally important, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, let me say how much I appreciate all of the private messages from many of our viewers for whom the lights have begun to come on, in which they begun to see how really honestly dangerous the gap doctrine is in regard to the inspiration of Scripture, in regard to the deity of Jesus Christ, in regard to the omniscience of the Father, about which we're going to have something to say in a later program. So again, let me encourage you, go back through the entire series of our programs in which we have been discussing the issue and the question, is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9? Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, let me say this again. Fundamental to the dispensational paradigm is the view that there is a gap. One individual with whom I have been interacting on Facebook over and over and over, he just simply repeats a mantra. Due to the Jewish rejection, God postponed the kingdom. And he said the kingdom offer was postponed. And he said the kingdom offer and the kingdom rejection took place in 3 separate stages. Now, he never gave any proof for that, mind you. He just simply said it was true. He gave a scriptural reference, but he did no exegesis. But here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. In the former charts, I have shared with you the kingdom offer was not a conditional offer, as this gentleman says. He says repeatedly, whether or not the kingdom was to be established was a contingency. It was a conditional promise based on whether or not Israel accepted or rejected. Well, again, that is absolutely false. Point number one, and then I'm going to get into chart number 8 today. Point number one, God knew, God predicted the Jewish rejection of Jesus. Psalms chapter 2. I'm not going to go into an exegesis of it. I developed it extensively in the previous videos. But in spite of the fact that God knew that Israel would reject his son, God said, he who sits in the heavens will laugh. He will hold them in derision, saying, yet, boy, that word yet is powerful. Yet have I set my king on my holy hill Zion, in spite of Jewish rejection, ladies and gentlemen. There's not a word, not a hint, not a clue, not a suggestion of any kind of postponement or delay between why do the heathen rage and he who sits in the heavens will laugh. No. You have to arbitrarily, capriciously, without any justification whatsoever, insert so far a 2,000-year gap in it. Point number 2, God said that when he sent his son in his incarnation, he would not fail, nor be discouraged until he has established justice and judgment in the earth. Again, Isaiah chapter 42, 3 and following. This is talking about Jesus' incarnation. It's not talking about the second coming. It is talking about the fact in his incarnation, Jesus would not fail. And like I've said, ladies and gentlemen, I don't care how you want to slice it or dice it. If you say that Jesus came at just the right time, the time chosen by the Father, and if Jesus offered the kingdom and the Jews rejected it, and Jesus could not do what he came to do, what the Father sent him to do, then guess what? The challenge of Christ has failed. He failed his own challenge. His own challenge, which was, if I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. So to reiterate, the work which the Father gave to Jesus in his incarnation was to establish the kingdom. Dispensationalism says he didn't do it. Therefore, the kingdom was postponed. That is failure. Finally, point number 3 that I pointed out in my earlier charts, and again, I'm hurrying along here. God said, according to his promise, he would set the seed of David on the throne of David and establish it like the sun, the moon, and the stars that cannot be moved. And Yahweh said, I will not alter the word that has gone out of my mouth. Wait a minute. I will not alter the word that's gone out of my mouth. Okay, so if Daniel set the time for the establishment of the kingdom for this first century, and God then postponed that time, changed that time, altered that time by 2,000 years, then Psalms 89 failed. And again, the challenge of Christ failed. Now, let us now shift gears to look at what I am calling chart number 8. Okay, chart number 8. And again, let me remind you that I don't have it here on my desk, thought I did. Okay, in my book, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy, I give you most of the charts that I've been sharing with you here on Now TV. Actually, I've added a couple of other charts to my database, not the book, but I've added some more charts to my database, and I'm going to share those with you as we proceed. But take advantage of getting my book, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy, by going to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Go to my bookstore, just look it up, and order that book. I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that book will blow your mind. Okay? I mean, it's amazing. The scholarship that I cite is world-class scholarship. I mean, the textual evidence that I cite is overwhelming. Like I said, you'll be blown away by that book. Okay, gotta hurry here. So, chart number 8. Here's my major premise. Premise number 1, the major premise is indisputably true. 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement. Well, look, folks, that's Daniel 9:24. I don't care. We can't deny that. 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. Now watch this. It doesn't say 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement, but the atonement will be made before the 70 weeks. It doesn't say 70 weeks will be made or determined, but the atonement will be made between the 69th and the 70th week. You see, that's got to be the dispensational view. They have got to take the position, ladies and gentlemen. They must, although they don't like it. They deny it, but it's true. If the cross is the point at which the 70-week countdown was suspended, and we're still waiting for the 70th week, then that means Jesus' death was within the 69th week. Okay? Unfortunately, Daniel 9 puts the death of Jesus in the middle of the 70th week. Puts it in the middle of the week that would follow the 62 and the 7 weeks. Do you see the problem? The math does not work. So if Jesus' death was after the 69th week, and it's in the middle of the 70th week, that means that God did not postpone the kingdom at the end of the 69th week. There is, therefore, no gap between the 69th week and the 70th. It means if there is a gap of so far 2,000 years, it is of necessity a 2,000-year gap between the 70 or 69th and a half week, in other words, in the middle of the 70th week, and the last 3.5 years of the 70th week. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on this premise alone, okay, dispensationalism falls apart. Why is that true? Well, here's the reason why. Very, very quickly, got to go on. In the dispensational paradigm, okay, remember, at the end of the 69th week, the countdown is postponed. At the end of the 69th week, God established the church, as an interim measure until such time as the rapture. The rapture removes the church from the earth. At the beginning of that period of time, immediately after the rapture, the man of sin manifests himself, and guess what he does? He signs a peace treaty with Israel. And he allows Israel, now, you know, how in the world he gets the authority to do this, and to get Israel to agree, and to get the Muslims to agree, we're never told. Okay, so whatever. So here we have, at the end of the 69th week, the suspension of the 70-week countdown, the establishment of the church age so far for 2,000 years, the rapture, the manifestation of the man of sin who signs a peace treaty with Israel, allowing her to rebuild the temple. That's the first 3.5 years of what is called the tribulation period, okay? Are you following me here? Well, that first 3.5 years is the first 3.5 years of the 70th week. Wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen. According to Daniel chapter 9, Messiah is cut off after the 69th week, which means it had to be in the 70th week. We'll prove that even more here momentarily. So Messiah's death to make the atonement had to be within the 70th week, and it'd be in the midst of the week, in the midst of the 70th week. But wait a minute. Remember, dispensationalists tell us the death of Jesus occurred back here at the end of the 69th week. An undeniable rejection of the text of Daniel chapter 9. This is why I have said so many times, ladies and gentlemen, and I say this with all due respect, I say this without any rancor, I say this without trying to attack anyone. But the dispensational paradigm is rife. It is completely consumed with error. There is no biblical justification for it whatsoever. And again, no rancor, no disrespect. I've got lots of friends who are dispensationalists. But you must catch the power of this. The death of Jesus would be to make the atonement. Hebrews chapter 9. Now, here's what you've got to catch. 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. The death of Jesus would be to make the atonement. Hebrews chapter 9, 24 through 28. Therefore, since 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement, and since the death of Jesus was for the purpose of making the atonement, that means that Jesus' death was within the 70 weeks and in the midst of the 70 weeks. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is simply undeniable. I mean, there's literally no way out of this. Now, here's the crux. Most people, and look, I understand, I really do. I understand that many people are going to disagree with what I'm about to say. That's okay, but I want to tell you, in my book, Seal It, Vision and Prophecy, I document this extensively from Jewish rabbis, from scriptural testimony. Most people believe that the atonement was completed at the time of the cross. Well, that sounds sort of kind of good. The only trouble with it is it's false. Now listen, the cross was the means by which God would make the atonement, but it was not the time at which the atonement was completed. In Hebrews chapter 9, 24 and following, the writer says, "Now once at the end of the age, Christ has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself." That's the atoning sacrifice. And by the way, take note of the following. This is so critical. Daniel 9 says, 24, 70 weeks are determined to put away sin. So the putting away of sin was also confined to the 70 weeks. Right? Got it? But Jesus died in order to put away sin. Therefore, Jesus' death was within the 70 weeks. Not in the 69th week, not in a gap between the 69th and the 70th week. It had to be within the 70 weeks, ladies and gentlemen. This is simply unavoidable. So we have two concepts. Number one, 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. Number two, 70 weeks are determined to put away sin. Hebrews chapter 9. Now once, at the end of the ages, Christ has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So since the 70 weeks were determined to put away sin and to make the atonement, And Jesus' death was for the purpose of putting away sin and to make the atonement. Then, to reiterate, Jesus' death had to be within the 70th week. Now watch this. As I noted a moment ago, all right? Many people say, many people say, and I once believed it, well, the atonement was finished at the cross. Unfortunately, Hebrews chapter 9 tells us Christ appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Hebrews chapter 9 verse 24 says Christ entered into the most holy place there to offer his blood. Now look, the writer of Hebrews is laying out the typological actions of the Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest killed the sacrifice. He took the blood, went into the most holy place, applied it to the mercy seat, and came back out to demonstrate that the sacrifice had been accepted. If he did not come back out, the sacrifice was rejected. But Hebrews chapter 9, verse 28 says, after talking about Jesus doing what? Appearing to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Number 2, entering into the most holy place there to prepare that place and to offer his blood. Now, Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 28, in perfect accord, perfect harmony with the Day of Atonement practices, says, and now to those who eagerly look for him. He uses the Greek word apeknekomai, which means an eager, expectant, looking for, expectation. Folks, it doesn't mean 2,000 years of looking. But to those who eagerly look for him, he shall appear again the second time apart from sin for salvation. Ladies and gentlemen, under the Old Covenant, in the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, there was no, quote, salvation until the high priest came out. The atonement was not completed until the high priest came out. And that means Jesus' second coming had to be within the 70 weeks. And I'm out of time. See you next week.